To tell us more about Indonesia Net Zero Summit 2023, let's welcome my next guest, who is the founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, or FPCI. He's the former ambassador of Indonesia to US. He founded the Indonesia Diaspora Network, and now he's also known as a staunch climate activist. Good afternoon, Pak Dino Patti Djalal. Great to have you back in the program.
Hi, Siska. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Always a pleasure, Pak. Pak Dino, first of all, congratulations for the success of the Indonesia Net Zero Summit 2023, which was just recently held over the weekend. Congratulations to you and the whole committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad it all worked out very well. And as you know, we were oversubscribed. A lot of people couldn't get in. Some of them were not too happy about it. But it also shows how much energy and attention the public, especially the young people, have on the issue of climate security.
That's great to hear, Pa. But before we discuss the summit in more detail, sir, could you first take us through your journey on being a climate warrior? Most of us know you as an influential figure in the diplomatic community, well-versed in international relations. What prompted your shift of focus to tackling climate crisis, if you don't mind telling us?
Well, I'm also new on climate change issues. When I was serving in government and Indonesia had to host COP in Bali, we had to do it because Thailand was supposed to be hosting COP 13 do it because of domestic political issues. So we ended up doing it, and that's when I started to learn about climate change issues, and I was shocked to hear about the possible predicaments that the whole humanity would be facing if we don't get things under control, right? So for me, also a learning situation, but also later on, I joined the board of World Resource Institute and also Paris Peace Forum, and I became more exposed to the serious global efforts that are underway to address climate catastrophe, and I became more convinced that Indonesia needs to be part of the solution, and more than that, Indonesia needs to be at the forefront of climate diplomacy, because that is in our DNA on issues that affect global well-being. Indonesia has always been willing to take the lead and punch above our weight. So it's been a very rewarding intellectual and personal and policy journey for me personally to learn about climate change and to join the climate activists out there.
All right, Pak Dino, now to go back to the summit, one of the most prominent takeaways from the recently held Net Zero Forum was for Indonesia to attain net zero emission even faster than 2050. Could you share with us the base for this optimistic target?
Well, I think it's entirely possible because a lot of countries around the world have set a target of 2050 as a net zero target. And keep in mind, 50 is what the IPCC recommends, which is the most authoritative body on climate change. And if we miss that deadline, the world will burn. And if we establish net zero 2060, that is 10 years after the world will be burning. So we need to be as ambitious as we can, and I'm very sure that we can, because the technology is really moving very fast. Not just the technology, but the investment and the political will are also very strong nowadays compared to, say, 20 years. Solar price, for example, has dropped by 85%. Right, and the price or the cost of wind turbines, for example, has also been cut dramatically. Right, so I think if we take advantage of the emerging technology, be it solar, hydrogen, hydro, wind, and others, and commit to fulfill our target of 23% renewable by 2025, and then enhance it even more, I'm sure we can be on the way to reaching net zero target by 2050. Besides, Indonesia is the only country in ASEAN, the only country that has set a net zero target beyond 2050. The rest of ASEAN has generally done so. Philippines is the only other ASEAN country that has not done so, but at least Philippines has established a 70% reduction target by 2030, right? So that is quite ambitious. So I do think that we can achieve that target of 2050 net zero. Yes.
Okay, so that's very encouraging to hear, Dino. But let's talk more about one of the biggest talking points when discussing the climate crisis, which is the urgent need of energy transition. But I'm sure, Dino, you are aware in practicality, it is easier said than done for countries to switch from fossil fuels to renewables, even for advanced countries and, of course, more so for developing nations. But in your view, how would countries where the majority of the people are still struggling to make ends meet should solve the energy issue, where they have to choose between affordable energy, like coal, for instance, that is more sustainable to their economy, to renewables that is more sustainable to the environment?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. But definitely we need to recognize that we need to clean up our energy. Because right now the dominance of coal cannot last forever, right? And keep in mind that coal is cheap because we make it cheap. It's being subsidized, right, by government. And recently, when the price of coal rose up, the subsidies went up dramatically also. It went up from 152 trillion rupiah to 502 trillion rupiah, about 3 times, right? So there's a huge jump. And definitely, we cannot have sustainable renewable energy so long as coal remains in the picture. And we are blessed with a lot of renewables potential in Indonesia. I think solar is our greatest source of renewable energy because we have plenty of sun, unlike in Europe, for example, or North America, right? And we just need to make sure that the incentives are right and the regulations are right, so that if people invest in solar, they will make money, right? Because we have to make sure the investors make money when they invest in solar. Right now, the big story is Masdar from Emirates. They're pumping a great deal of funds, 140 million, to build the largest floating solar in Southeast Asia in Danau Cirata, right? But we need to make sure that they succeed, that we can provide them with all the incentives so that they can show the world that if you invest in solar in Indonesia, you will do well and you will be profitable, right? So that's the key, to have as much positive regulations and incentives. And don't forget about geothermal, right? Geothermal, Indonesia has the largest geothermal potential. About 40% of world geothermal source is in Indonesia. But we're still not a major geothermal producer in the world, right? But the key is really having the right investment, sustaining the political will, and then also providing the right regulation and incentives for the private sector to go in and invest in these renewables, because the government has very limited capacity and funds to invest in these. But the best way is to get our own investors, domestic investors and foreign investors, to put up their money to build our renewable energy in this industry. So I'm very optimistic that the transition can be done, and it has to be done.
All right, Dino, it's very exciting to hear about all the potential. Hopefully we can tap into those potentials soon. But I want to talk more about one of the struggles in fighting for climate justice, which is the lack of real policies that can create real change. Now, if we talk specifically about Indonesia, with all due respect, do our policymakers understand the urgency of tackling climate change, especially those in the levels of regional administration?
Well, I think they are starting to get it, yeah. Because at the Indonesian Net Zero Summit that we held recently, for the first time, we asked aspiring political leaders from all the parties to explain their position on climate change. And I think for some of them, or many of them, that was the first time they were asked to explain their climate position and articulate it. So it's a good thing that at least many of them now understand that climate issue is an issue that is important for the nation, and that they have to have a policy about it. And the big challenge is, of course, the regional governments, the provincial governments. You have about over 500 kabupaten. And they definitely need part of the solution, because 70% of the emissions will take place in the cities in the coming decades. So definitely the region and the mayors and government really need to put net zero calculations or projections, their development priority. At the moment, unfortunately, the majority of local leaders don't understand it because they don't care, but they haven't been explained, and they really haven't learned enough the seriousness of it. So I think the more we reach out to them and more we engage them, we will have more positive impacts, especially know that everything planned for the good of their people will not happen unless we have climate security by 2050.
All right. Pak Dino Patti Djalal, thank you so much for sharing with us your time, your insights, and your passion. Thank you so much for telling us everything that we need to know how to be a part of the solution on tackling climate change. Thank you, Pak. We wish you all the best for your efforts and keep on fighting the good fight.